Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EVN Disrupt podcast. My name is Ashot Papoyan. I'm the editor of the creative tech section here at EVN Report. This week, we are continuing our series of podcasts from the Science and Technology Convergence Conference. We were happy to be the media partner of the STC conference, which was organized by SmartGate's Catalyst Foundation, with the support of the European Union and the GIZ Foundation. Once again, we have two guests on this week's podcast. Our first guest is Ashot Papoyan, a biotech executive who currently holds the positions of Chief Operating Officer at Biosim, and he's also the CEO of Elm Tree Research. Our second guest is Haig Eskandarian, a microbiologist at the University of California, San Francisco. With our two guests, we spoke about both experimental biology and commercializing science findings in the biotech industry. Thank you for listening. Ashot, let's start with a little bit of your background. Tell us how you got involved in the biotech space and what it is you guys are doing at Elm Tree and Biosim.
Thank you, Nishda, and thank you for having me. A little bit about myself. So I was born and raised in Yerevan in Armenia, and I did my initial undergrad and master's degree here at Yerevan State University in biophysics, after which I went to complete my PhD at Cornell University in New York, and sort of been involved in a biotech and healthcare ever since. What was interesting that after finishing a PhD at Cornell, we sort of were initial members of a biotech company that was the spin-off from Cornell University, and we stayed in Ithaca for a few years and then moved to Boston. Mm-hmm. So currently we reside in Boston, and one of the sort of first things we did when my wife and I, when we moved to Boston, is establish an Armenian biotech group in Boston, which sort of started as lunch sort of meetings between friends, 2-3 people, that grew to be about 150, 160 people now. Wow. From students to CEOs, from scientists to tech people, and we meet on regular basis, more so before COVID, in person. During COVID, we did some sort of more online meetings. And the main goal is network, get to know each other, do business together, and then try to be involved in Armenian biotech healthcare space.
It's kind of like the biotech version of high tech, which was started in the Valley. Yeah. And for those who don't know, Boston is really the global capital of biotech companies. Right?
It's a worldwide, probably number one sort of hotspot.
What is it about the Boston ecosystem that has turned it into such a competitive space for biotech companies and the biotech ecosystem?
I think primarily the education system.
The universities.
The universities there, the Harvard, the MIT, Tufts, and more of a history, how it started. And the state of Massachusetts had back in maybe 60s, 70s, started doing a strong implementing targeted program to advanced biotech. For example, even in our small example, our original biotech company that was found in the state of New York, after we grew just a little bit, the state of Massachusetts actually gave us a sizable grant to move the whole company to Massachusetts. Yeah, so they have very targeted approach how to grow it, and after the system sort of becomes like a living organism itself. So they did a strong original investment and targeted approach, and then the universities picked up, and now it's considered a number one sort of hotspot, healthcare biotech hotspot.
It really speaks to how important it is to have strategic directions in developing your local ecosystem, right?
And it was done on a state level,
right?
60, 70 years ago.
So the Armenian biotech space is still quite small and new, I would say. What are some lessons we can take from Massachusetts to develop our local biotech ecosystem here?
Again, it needs to be sort of a targeted government approach, and to real life assessment, the resources we have here, the talent we have here, and then understand what are the needs and what network we have worldwide, and how we can leverage that network to bring the biotech space here.
And for biotech, it's perhaps sometimes a little bit more complicated than other sub-industries because it involves professionals from various backgrounds to develop that ecosystem, right?
And in addition to that, so the complexity of the issue, also the equipment that is involved in doing biotech and healthcare. I think there is sort of two types of approaches or two types of disciplines there, where there is the computational biology, which is right now what Biosim is specializing in, computational drug design. In that case, your investment in equipment is not that much. So if you have a good talent here, you have the opportunity to move the project forward. But there is experimental biology in addition to that. So that's the sort of the majority of the biology and the technology there. That one can require a strong investment. And in many cases, the equipment is not there. More recently, the more advanced equipment is designed to be used very frequently, like high throughput and things like that. You can bring $500,000 equipment here, and it's just not, if you're not going to use it, if you're going to use it once or twice a year, it's just not worth the investment. So it's a little bit chicken and egg problem. So someone needs to step up, perhaps the government or investors, and support it for initial period of time until it sort of becomes a living organism on its own.
And is able to sustain itself. In examples like that, it's often government funding or state funding that can really drive that forward, right?
Yeah, most of the time. I think because that's a long return investment. As I said, like Massachusetts probably started pushing on that maybe in 60s, and now we're seeing the reward of that. And they are getting all their money back and more with via taxes and things like that. But initially, they smart people,
saw that the future would be this would be important for the future. So we're here at the Science and Technology Convergence Conference, and if I'm not mistaken, Biosim, which was co-founded by your brother Ashot Papoyan, and which you're the chief operating officer of, the idea of it and the sort of initial connections were started at the same conference in 2019, I've heard. It's an interesting story of how diaspora and Armenia can really collaborate together to build a company like Biosim in Armenia. How you view effective diaspora-Armenia collaborations and what it is that Biosim is doing?
Yeah, so as it relates to the diaspora and how to leverage that, right? So I think as Armenians, we're good at networking, but we still have ways to go in terms of doing like a productive networking and targeted structural networking. And what SmartGate is good at is really putting sort of meaning and targets and deliverables behind all these networking conferences that they're organizing, such as this one. And exactly what, as you described, so that was the science that Eskandarian has brought, met here with the resources that the SmartGate brought in and met at the conference. And the Biosim was born about 2 years ago with initial investment from SmartGate. And as I said, the Biosim is doing the computational drug design. So it's doing the type of biology that doesn't require a lot of initial investment into equipment. And the talent is here. And as you know, the IT space, the technology space is really good in Armenia, and the talent pool was available. So from the sort of evolutionary standpoint, the way the system is going to work. So what Biosim does is developing a platform that is doing sort of virtual screen of all the potential molecules that can become medicine.
Right.
In the conventional drug discovery, all that screen is done real life on a table with expensive equipment and expensive human time, basically. So instead of doing thousands and thousands of experiments and trying to figure out that one molecule that has the potential of becoming a medicine, a drug, what Biosim does, it does all this virtual screen, does it with this specific formula, and selects that one or two or few molecules. So that really cuts down the time and investment needed to not do those experiments.
Right.
So as experimentalist, you don't have to do 1,000 experiments anymore. You need to do only 5. So the time in this biotech and pharma space, time is the most valuable thing.
Boosting
so
productivity
if I need to
and
do,
research.
thousands of experiments is going to take me years. It's going to cost me a lot of investment.
Yeah.
So this is and Biosim now has developed sort of world's best and most accurate and the fastest the screening technology that is going to advance the drug discovery field.
Can you tell us a little bit about where, if you guys have raised another funding round, or if you are really just focused right now on building more of your market and attracting clients, customers?
So right now we are at a research and development stage. We just finished a successful round, and so we have the necessary resources to finish the development of the product. As I said, the product is brand new, so it's going to require some validation experiments. So I'm hoping that we can bring together the biologists from Armenia in Armenia to do the experimental part as well. So the computational part, that part that is being done with the use of computers, is almost complete. So our next stage is to take these molecules that the Biosim platform is going to recommend or is going to figure out from this list of thousands of molecules and take it to the experimental lab and actually test it, that these molecules are working as intended.
Right.
And that's a very long and expensive process.
Right.
So we're hoping to do part of it in Armenia as well, and that will become a spark again to advance, to help develop the experimental biology ecosystem as well.
And then is the vision to then partner up with pharmaceutical companies to actually develop the drug?
Once the platform is ready, there are two ways to go, which are not mutually exclusive. One is a company can buy the software and run their own screens, or they can partner with us and we can do the screens for them and co-develop the future molecule or the future drug. Or we do our own screens and then we find molecules that we are interested in, that we see the potential of becoming a drug. So
which would be produced by Biosim? Maybe?
Which would be, it's a very, very long process it's not realistic to think that we will be the producers or manufacturers of a drug that will be on the shelf.
Right.
That's a different Herculean task that is being done by large pharma and things like that. So when we get to that stage, we're going to partner with someone else to do the manufacturing and FDA approvals and things like that.
In terms of diaspora Armenia effective collaborations, you're someone who was born in Armenia, you studied here, and then you spent most of your career in the U.S., it sounds like. What's your message to diasporans who might be listening, who are also in fields like biotech or other cutting-edge fields who want to get involved in Armenia? How should they approach it? What's the best way to get started?
That's an interesting question. I think the message should be more towards the Armenians from Armenia, because the diaspora Armenians, they're moving their careers forward and their lives forward as is. And it is not realistic to expect that most of the diaspora Armenians will become involved like Garagin and I are, because we have the connection and things like that. So I think the message would go more towards the Armenians from Armenia, that try to seek out the connections that you need and do your homework when you are doing these networkings, and understand exactly, be very specific of what you need. So many times I would receive these messages say, can you help us and be very general, and then I have no idea. I need to do a lot of homework myself to understand what they need, and usually I just don't have the time to do it and things like that. So I think overall my experience has been that the diaspora Armenians are there to participate, to support, to make businesses here and things like that, but they need drivers here. They need someone to really take the wheel and do it. In that case, they will find partners there.
Right. Yeah.
To expect that it's the other way around, like, oh, these guys from the US are going to come and fix the problems here, it's not realistic. It's not realistic. I think we don't know, even with our involvement, like Garagin and I, which is more than most, we don't know the details of the issues on the ground, the needs on the ground. But if someone comes with a very specific question and very specific request, most of the times we can be of help one way or another.
It's also more effective, I think, because often diasporans don't know where to start. So if people working on important things in Armenia are the ones to take the first step and take the initiative to reach out to people in the diaspora who can really be helpful to them, I think is much more impactful, actually.
And the efficiency is going to be there. And
it's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I want to hear about what you guys are doing at Elmtree. Can you tell us a little bit about the products you guys are working on and the research directions you're taking?
Elmtree Research, I co-founded with my business partner, Dr. Zorar Manukyan, who is also Armenian and also from Armenia, but now lives in Boston. So again, one of the sort of outcomes of the Armenian Biotech group, sort of networking events and things like that. What Elmtree Research does, we specialize in finding sort of cutting-edge treatment and for monitoring of mental health and addiction.
Okay.
So starting from my previous company, I have always been interested in sort of developing the next generation painkillers, which would be non-addictive. As you probably know, addiction issue is very big in the US.
Opioids
and things like, only in last year there were more than 100,000 deaths from the overdose. So I've been involved sort of at the beginning. I've been involved on a molecular level, how to find what medicines to find that will do the job of being a painkiller but non-addictive. So that sort of got me interested in that field. And when we were sort of discussing how to, what can be done and things like that, we understood that one of the problems is when a patient comes from treatment to treatment, it could be a week or a month in between those two visits. And it's not really clear what happens in between. Mm-hmm. So we thought we could be, with a wearable device, we could develop a technology that will read biomarkers, basically, a person's breathing rate, temperature, and there are varieties of biomarkers. And when we combine all those together, we can sort of perhaps understand if the person has taken
too
much and things like that.
Right.
So that was the original idea, and that we founded the company Elmtree Research. We also have clinics there, which are called Elmtree Clinics, which are real clinics with real patients coming in. So we have the advantage of having access to the patients and patient data and understand the effectiveness of the tools that are being developed.
Yeah. Regarding the wearables, is it like popular wearables like Apple Watches and stuff, or wearables that you guys yourselves have manufactured?
No, this is going to be integrated in one of the commercial ones.
So it's a software solution, right? Yeah. One of the most interesting takeaways I've had over these last 2 days doing podcasts here at the Science and Technology Convergence Conference is how effective sort of diaspora networking groups can be. It sounds like the Biotech group in Boston spun off at least a couple of companies. High Tech has been just super successful in the Valley and bridging Armenia with them. It sort of brings to mind, why can't Armenians in finance in New York or other industries, create similar groups and try to have similar impact through their networking for Armenia? So I think if we have listeners listening in from other industries, they should really consider placing those efforts and finding, local Armenians in similar industries and working together on it.
I would say the key is finding folks who would lead that effort.
Yeah.
Who would. It's like we were talking originally about doing the original investment and then you get the rewards later, right? So someone would need to invest the original time, an organizer, and be rejected and be said, no, I can't come, many times until it becomes the original crystallization point, and then it will be productive.
And self-sustainable.
Something of that sort happened in Boston when we were creating the Armenian Biotech group. I'm not sure what was the history of the High Tech, but I'm sure there was one or two or a team of people that led the effort, and now we are all sort of harvesting the results of that.
Yes, yeah.
So I think in finance, whether it's in New York, there needs to be this development of this original volunteer effort to do it, and then once it happens, everyone is going to like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Ashot, my last question. What do you hope to see for the Armenian biotech ecosystem in the next 10 years? What are some things we need to be focusing on to get there?
I think, I want to see it develop like the IT sector has developed. But I want to be realistic that, it takes more time, more investment to do it, and it takes time to develop entire field. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to see this computational biology develop, be the drug discovery part or the bioinformatics, DNA sequence analysis, and things like that. Things that can be done with knowledge and a computer, basically. But that would lead to offshoots of experimental biology, and I know there are labs that are being developed and things like that. And then a better understanding how we can take advantage of our geography, which in many cases is unfortunate, but also what we can do. How can we become a regional center that can support Iran,
service the
region,
yeah.
large country, and service that sort of thing. So it will go computational, and then if we're successful on that part, it will go into experimental biology, which is the heavy part of biology.
Okay, Ashot, this was a fascinating conversation. I personally learned a lot from it. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk about this again in the future.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
for
Ashot.
inviting me.
My guest is Haig Eskandarian, a microbiologist from the University of California, San Francisco. Haig, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Pleasure.
Over the last 2 days, we've been here at the Science and Technology Convergence Conference, and we've been speaking to a lot of people from industry, in the biotech industry. And you're from the academia side. You're the bio part of the biotech. So I want to speak with you about that today, but let's first start off with a little bit of your background. Tell us what it is you do and what are your research interests.
Yeah, so I'm a microbiologist and I study infection biology, actually. So I come from the United States, but I'm French Armenian.
Cool.
And I did my PhD in France, in Paris, at the Pasteur Institute, which is really focused on understanding how and why bacteria behave the way they do, particularly in the context of infection. After doing my PhD in Paris, I moved to Lausanne in Switzerland, where I worked in an engineering school, which builds tools for then utilizing them in biology. And there I was really seduced to do a postdoc trying to understand how and why bacteria can tolerate stresses to which they're genetically sensitive. And so we build tools to drive discovery of new ways in which bacteria live, emerge, adapt, and die, which is rather exciting. It's rather new. It's really going back to first principles and offers us new perspectives in biology.
Yeah. What are some trends in academia and biology that we should all be aware of?
That's a very interesting question. So I would say that I'll take a step back and I'll say that I am a doctor of philosophy. We're not doctors of science. And what that means is that we use science to drive an understanding of how our world exists. So that's to say that new technologies that we bring to biology allow us to understand how this world works and how organisms exist in new ways. So new trends. Well, I think that one very important trend is the invasion or the re-invasion of physicists and quantitative minded people into the biology field again. And what that means is that, for example, we are able to develop tools that allow us to study biology in ways that we couldn't previously. So part of that is, for example, building advanced microscopes, where, for example, the work I do focuses on not seeing a cell, but touching and feeling a cell.
What does that mean?
That means that microscopes, optical microscopes, have existed for 400 years.
Right.
And we can see things and perceive cells in various ways. But what we have the capability of doing now is developing microscopes that touch surfaces of bacteria, for example, which are the organisms I study, and that allows us to see features and feel and understand how bacteria exist in ways that we previously couldn't. That allows us to, for example, understand why a bacterium divides the way it does. And this question of why certain processes happen, I think, is critical. A critical aspect in biology that is underappreciated and for which disruptive engineering-based techniques are really necessary to drive forward.
Yeah. We've been having these conversations with scientists like yourself over the last couple of days, and it's just incredible to hear how much of science has really become interdisciplinary. So now you're talking about physicists and people from the field of optics driving innovation in biology.
Absolutely.
And earlier we were hearing about it in different perspectives. Where academic biology fits into the greater biotech ecosystem, that's a part that I really want to understand. So there's computational biology, which are computer scientists and bioinformaticians taking data and working with it to solve problems. But often that data has to come from a lab or has to be validated in a lab. Speak a little bit about how the wet labs play their role in the ecosystem.
Well, let me tell you why academics exist in the first place, perhaps, which is to say that biologists in academia try to understand why systems exist the way they do. Why do bacteria behave the way they do? Why do diseases emerge? All of those discoveries form the basis for then how to then create solutions in the biotech field. One way to refine the way a solution can be developed in the biotech field is by doing other sorts of experiments, which are not fundamental experiments, but translational experiments, which take an idea which has been established and discovered in fundamental research, and then translating those into tractable solutions that can then be developed into products which can be commercialized.
Right. So if I'm understanding correctly, biology, academic biology, often sets the direction that biotech companies and people working in biotech take.
Yes.
And then they sort of reverse engineer the solution from the problem that is defined by you guys.
Yeah, we establish the bounds of how life exists and why it does. And that offers a perspective on what we can actually do later on.
So you're at the University of California, San Francisco.
That's correct.
Which is in San Francisco, the sort of the global capital of technology. Have you seen more and more university industry collaborations over the last, let's say, 5, 7, 10 years, specifically in biotech?
I have seen a lot more collaborations emerging, not only in San Francisco, not only in the Bay Area, but also in other hubs like Boston. I would say that Boston is really the Mecca, and San Francisco is the Medina of that sort of relationship between academia and private industry. But I would say that, in fact, even UCSF is very, very slow to translate discoveries into solutions in private industry, and that's partially at the institutional or the lack of institutional drive to drive translation forward. Now, that being said, what I think is really exciting about, for example, a place like Armenia, is that you don't have any of those institutions necessarily that could hold you back. So we can establish something new right from the start, where we take academia and we take private industry and we create those interactions right from the start.
What are the institutions that hold you back in the U.S.?
We have tech transfer offices, which are quite small, which are also not very imaginative per se. So they see, for example, a market for what it is. For example, I could say, you want to develop an antibiotic, and so they'll say, well, there's no money in that. So why would you want to do that? It's not viable. But if we say that we can develop not just one antibiotic, but thousands of antibiotics, and disrupt even the definition of what an antibiotic is in the first place, I think that that's very exciting and powerful.
Yeah.
That all depends on whether the institution actually understands that in the first place. That requires scientists in a tech transfer office that are imaginative people, and we don't quite have that yet.
So because Armenia is kind of still somewhat of a blank slate, we can avoid some of those mistakes that have been made in the U.S. and other
I think
places.
so.
Yeah.
And I think that we are a global nation. And so we can really take advantage of exceptional people around the world. That is our true wealth.
Leverage that resource.
Yeah, that is our true wealth. I mean, yes, our wealth is as well in our land here, but I think even more so, it's in our network, our uniqueness, our Armenianness, as it were.
Right. So what is the current state of academic biology in Armenia? Give us sort of an overview of where we are. Do we have a lot of wet labs that are operating in the universities, or what do we need to work on?
So we have academic research here in Armenia, but not as much in universities as in institutes which are governed by the National Academy of Sciences here. The way in which the National Academy of Sciences has worked for many years has been based on how the Soviet system worked, which is to say that funding comes from the state, goes to the institutes will distribute that cash among each of the labs. The way research works in the Occidental world is grant-driven. You apply competitively for grants, and that enables you to do research. If you don't get grants, the lab closes down. It couldn't be scary, but that's the reality of life, or the reality of the system. And we need to impress that upon Armenians in Armenia. We need to develop as well institutions that allow for researchers here to apply for grants in a competitive way, to offer them the ability to write grants in a competitive way. So grantsmanship is important. It's a way of thinking, but all of that is solvable. Inevitably. It's a question of culture. It's a question of understanding.
Practices within the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have wet labs right now in Armenia that can support a biotech ecosystem? Can they take some of those findings and validate them through the experiments? So
I think that one tractable area of biology is in fact computational biology, which melds physicists, mathematicians, statisticians with biologists and biological problems, for which a lot of big data is available in many instances, and for which big data can be generated rather quickly here or elsewhere.
So we're here today at the Science and Technology Convergence Conference, and there's a lot of professionals from both the diaspora and locally here in Yerevan. Is there anything you're seeing, any effective and efficient collaboration models for scientists like yourself from abroad to be working with local institutions?
I think that the real excitement of this sort of conference is really to offer, for example, me as an academic scientist, the opportunity to meet people that would help me translate discoveries into biotech companies in the future, where I meet not only venture capitalists or MBAs who actually know how to run a business, but also people that could work, scientists or engineers who could work in that sort of company. I think that that's the rather excitement of this sort of conference. That I would never go to this sort of conference abroad. There's no reason for me to do so as an academic. But here in Armenia, all of a sudden, it happens. That's rather, I think there's magic there.
Is there maybe some entrepreneurial paths in your future that we can look out for?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You'll have to promise to come back when the startup launches and talk about it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Haig. Thank you.
Pleasure.